Here for Your podcast, and I'm one of your hosts, Valentina Barros. As you can tell, we don't have Harper or Hilliard here, and that's because we have a very special treat for you guys this episode. Today, you won't be really hearing from us, but instead, you'll be hearing from a professional, Dr. Chiraroekmongkon. And we wanted to do a special episode to just finish off this mental health series that we've been kind of doing, and that way, you get to listen from an expert. Just for context, I was able to meet Dr. Chiraroekmongkon at my program at Yale, the Yale Young Global Summers program, and it was just amazing because she gave a lecture on solving these global issues, on particularly in mental health and what she's been doing. She's currently the Yale psychiatry resident, and also she's a co-leader for the Happiness Project, who's just amazing. They're equipping individuals all around the world who are under-resourced for mental health issues. So that will be really great just to hear, because it's always great to do our own research and also learn from professionals. So we really want it to be an outlet where you guys can not only help yourself if you're struggling with mental health issues, but also help others who are struggling with it. So without further ado, let's just do our prayer and, get started into it. So thank you so much, God, for this amazing opportunity that we have to hear from a professional, how you're always equipping us with all the right sources and people. I pray that you help our listener, whether they're currently struggling with mental health issues or we're wanting to help other people, that you just give us your grace and your wisdom to do so. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. And so it's going to be a really fun episode, so stay tuned, and until then, I will see you towards the end. So hello, thank you so much for your time. I'm so excited to dive deeper into this jungle of mental health, and I'm beyond honored to have you here today. But before that, let's start with introductions. Doctor, I'm so sorry if I butcher your name. I've been practicing, but it's Dr. Chiraroekmongkon, right? Feel free
Chiraroekmongkon.
to and correct me.
It's Dr.
Sounds good.
Chiraroekmongkon.
Dr. Chiraroekmongkon, yes. And do you mind sharing an overview of just your professional background and expertise in the field of mental health?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Valentina. I really appreciate being here. So, I'm currently a psychiatry resident at Yale. I'm in my final year of psychiatry residency, where I'm also doing a public psychiatry fellowship. So, I'm interested in working for the marginalized community and areas with limited resources. I also led as the resident leader of the Yale Global Mental Health Program for the last 3 years.
Wow, that is amazing. It truly is just such an honor to have you here, and just seeing how you are relentlessly fighting this intense battle of mental health. I know I have a lot of loved ones who suffer from mental health illnesses, so we're just incredibly grateful to have professionals like you to help us out. And just in that train of thought, how would you describe the current landscape of mental health issues globally, and just including any statistics or trends that you see?
Yeah. I mean, to sum it up shortly, I think there is a huge need in mental health right now.
Mm,
And we are in a society where we're in a mental health crisis.
yeah.
Um, this one is just a survey that was conducted by CNN in 2022, where they had young adults and basically anyone who could take the survey. So the young adults, one half and one third, half of all young adults and one third of all adults reported that they felt anxious either often or always in the last year, and one third reported they couldn't get the services they need. 80% cited cost as a barrier, and 60% citing stigma and shame. As you know, there's also a huge shortage of mental health providers. Um, so right now we're really struggling on all fronts, especially with rising statistics of depression, anxiety, and then there's a huge shortage of mental health providers. Um, there's also a glaring health disparity that's coming into the limelight, especially with the pandemic,
Yeah.
including with race and gender, especially in America. So for these statistics, it's coming from the Substance Use and Mental Health Services Administration. So um, the they had 21% of Black or African Americans reported having a mental illness, but only
Mm.
39% receive mental health services as compared to 52% of whites. And for Latinx, that number is also very low, 36% receiving mental health services. Um, and then we know that Native Americans have the highest suicide rates of all racial and ethnic groups.
Mm.
Asian Americans are the least likely to present to mental health care. We also know that LGBT groups have higher suicide rates, higher
Mm.
substance use rates. And so these are all um, staggering statistics that is really something we need to focus on and pay attention to.
Yes, that's insane how there's just so much that we know is going on. But just before exploring any potential solutions and just way to help, how would you define mental health?
So, according to the WHO, the World Health Organization, it's a state of mental well being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, to realize their abilities, to learn well and work well, and to contribute to their communities. So, mental health is an integral component of health and well being and is more than an absence of mental disorder.
Wow, that I think that is just amazing. Not amazing, but ready to have know what mental health is because, like you mentioned, I remember in your lecture at the Yale Young Global Scholars how there's just so much ways that society tries to tell you what is mental health and the stigmas that come around it. And I remember writing down in my notebook, I loved just so much your lecture. I was just so inspired by everything that you're doing. But a key thing that really stood out to me was that there are several factors for mental health illnesses which are biological, social, and psychological factors. So, could you expand more on these factors and to what extent do you believe that people bear the responsibility for their mental health?
Yeah. So there are important components to understanding mental health, like what you're saying with biological, social, and psychological factors. These are things that we as mental health providers sort of organize how suffering and illness can be affected by multiple levels. And it's also a way to see where we can strengthen our approach and really help the clients that we serve. So, with biological, it refers to our genetics or our physical organ system. These are things like, do you have a family history of depression that makes you more likely to have depression? Or maybe there's a biologic engine that drives you to have a depletion of serotonin in your brain that could lead to more symptoms of depression. Do you have a chronic medical condition that leads to chronic stress? Or do you have chronic pain that puts a long term stress on you and impact your overall well being? Biologic is also an area where exercise and routine sleep has been shown to improve our overall wellness. This is also an area where a psychiatrist comes in, where we prescribe medications and really help with our biologic factors. With psychological, these are things about how we understand ourselves and the world. So there are things like, your coping mechanisms, your thought patterns. So, for example, for some people, when they have a bad day, you we can self isolate. So this is like a common coping mechanism that we've developed. But then after a while, self isolation can make depression even worse, and it can become a vicious cycle. And then with thought patterns, some people have very self deprecating thought patterns like, oh, I'm such a failure, or
Yeah.
I never do anything right. So these things also become a vicious cycle and contribute to symptoms of depression and anxiety. So, areas where we strengthen this is really through therapy and, therapy with psychologists, social workers, or even psychiatrists. And we really focus on strengthening our understanding of ourselves, learning how to accept and also make sense of suffering in the world.
Right.
So these are the psychological factors. And then for our third factor, which is our social factor, there are things like your work, your school. Do you have stable housing? Do you have stable income? It's almost like Maslow hierarchy of needs. Do you
Yeah.
feel safe in your environment? Do you have clothing? Do you have shelter? Um, the social component also expands to our connection to the community. Do you have a support group you can lean on? Is there, for example, a climbing community that you hang out with every week? Um, we also think about cultural factors in your social factor. So what is your ethnicity? What is your upbringing? What is your cultural norms and beliefs that you grew up with? What are your experiences, or have you had experiences of oppression and discrimination? And then I think there's a fourth component
Mm,
um, that I did not mention in the lecture, but it's another important component that's being more in the forefront, which is the spiritual component.
mm,
So our spiritual component is about our faith, our being, sort of our tradition, are the things that we're doing in alignment with our intrinsic value. Do we feel like we have a safe place that we belong to?
mm.
I like to sort of think of this category as our soul and our morality in some
Yeah.
ways. Yeah.
Yes.
So those are the four components. And they certainly, it helps to separate them, but at the end of the day, they do all interact with one another. So even if there are things like, um, let's say you have experiences of gender violence, um, that would technically fall under social things that you have experienced. However, that would also experience your psychological well-being. It would also experience your spiritual wholeness, and that has been also shown to affect our biological wiring. So they all interact with one another, and I think because of all of these factors, that's what makes mental health so nuanced and so um, important to sort of work together to uphold, and requires a lot of multidisciplinary and a lot of areas to come together to really uplift. Um,
Mm.
and of course, you can go to therapy for a long time, develop
Mm.
like an immense understanding for yourself and really develop resiliency in how you navigate the world. And yet, if you continue to experience societal harm, then it may continue to affect you, over time. So there are a lot of things that come into play when it talks about your mental health.
Wow, yes. I love the breakdown of it because, like you said, it all works together. There's just not one single like, clean solution that kind of like band aid that fixes mental health. But going back to what you mentioned, like cultural factors and all that, I know that there's especially. I think it has become a little bit more like stigmatized, or it has become less stigmatized over the years. But I know that there is a lot of stigma still going with mental health. Like a lot of people are like, you're being over dramatic, you're just sad. So in light of this research and everything, or not this research, but in light of these like culture that we're living in, what are some common misconceptions or stigmas surrounding mental health that individuals often believe?
Yeah. So a big one that I hear, I think even with people who come into the clinic, is that mental health issues are a result of personality weakness or character
Mm,
flaws.
yeah,
That is certainly upheld in a lot of cultural norms, that, oh, you shouldn't go get help, because if you go get help, that means you have a sign of weakness.
yeah,
You don't have depression, because if you have depression, that means that you did something wrong and that you're weak. When really, this is all inaccurate and it's false, and it's actually harmful to perpetuate, because like what we were talking about, we know that there very real biological, psychological, social, and spiritual factors that contribute to symptoms of depression, that contribute to you feeling unwell. And it's not about being lazy, and it's not about being weak. Um, and it's not about trying hard enough and you can snap out of it either. So it's
yeah.
really important to be able to seek professional help. I So that's one big misconception. And then another one is that there's no hope. I
Okay.
think that that's also very tough message that's out there. And actually, most people who come to get professional help, or even if they lean on their community, most people do get better and are on a trajectory to improve their overall health and well-being.
Yes, those are some really, and even just as you were talking about it, I can totally hear from like from other friends or that have believed into just this perspective, especially the one that's like, you have no hope or depression. If people, a lot of the times when you don't know someone's story or background, they think if they use depression or anything, anxiety as an excuse, but in reality, like you said, there's just so many factors that come into play. So thank you for expanding on that. I feel like I've learned so much already, but I feel that currently we have two types of listeners. That one, it's the listener who's struggling with mental health illnesses themselves, and then the second one is the listener who's just attempting to support loved ones who are struggling with those mental health illnesses. And I believe that both perspectives are just equally important. And so I want to try and address those two. So let's first start addressing the listeners who are struggling with mental health illnesses. What would you say? What are some common signs or symptoms that might indicate that it's time for someone to just seek professional help?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So I would say that there one red flag sign that really is like super red flag, you need to go get help now, and that's if you're having suicidal thoughts or thoughts that you would be better off dead. That is a strong signal that it's now time to seek professional help and support. And then there are other important signs as well, but I think these are more orange flags rather than red flags. And there are things like maybe you find yourself having difficulty regulating your emotions the way you would like to. Maybe you're feeling burnt out, where you used to really enjoy work or school, but now you're not enjoying it as much, and you find yourself having less energy, not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to do things, um, or if you have a deep sense of loss or sense of despair, difficulty with a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
Um, and if you find yourself having things like crying more, noticing yourself to be crying multiple times per week. Or for some people, they don't exhibit in crying, but maybe you feel yourself to be more angry, angry all the time, angry to every little thing, or more angry than usual. So these are all signs that that you deserve help, and I would encourage you to reach out and ask for professional help.
Yes, thank you so much for expanding on that. It's incredibly insightful. And I loved how you said you deserve help because, like, again, just coming back to and emphasizing that it needing help is not a weakness. It's actually a sign of strength to go and seek help. And I would just want to add, like, while individuals are waiting to access professional mental health support, what are some practical self care practices or coping strategies that you would recommend for these individuals?
Yeah, another great question. Um, I think this question is really a personalized and individual answer.
Mm,
So, whatever works best for that individual, I would encourage them to strengthen those things. Um, the number one thing I would recommend for everybody is getting 8 hours of sleep. So, if your sleep is off, everything else will always be off. So, make sure that you prioritize that as number one. And then there are things like getting regular physical exercise. That's certainly been shown to help with your serotonin and dopamine level, and it definitely helps relieve symptoms of depression. Journaling, writing down your feelings, writing down all your emotions, writing down your thoughts, and seeing if you're having those negative maladaptive patterns. Um, meditating is actually also shown to be um, as equivalently effective as actually an antidepressant medication.
wow.
So that could be another resource that could be very helpful. There's also peer support services, so things like a support group when you're going through a hard time when it's about specific things. So, for example, with alcohol or with other substances. There's also it also doesn't have to be such a well organized sort of peer support group, but it could just be a community group like, oh, you really like to do yoga. So you go to yoga classes and build yourself a community there. Those are certainly all examples of um, self care practices and coping strategies that I would recommend people explore.
Thank you. Yes, those are, I'm gonna add those, especially the sleeping one. As a high schooler, I feel like I don't get enough sleep at all, but you're completely right. I know that when I don't sleep, I don't have any energy and all of that. It just, when you just sleep, you feel so much better. And just like you mentioned, it doesn't have to be a routine. It can be little things that just make you feel better. And definitely, there's not like one recipe for everyone. It just, or like a cookie cutter solution. It kind of varies on everyone. So thank you for sharing. And then just turning our attention to those who are seeking to support their loved ones. I would just say when offering support to someone with a mental health illness, what are some key communication strategies that can foster trust and openness?
Yeah. I think this is such a sweet question, and it shows that, we care about our loved ones and we care about our friends and to support them. I would say that um, having a non-judgmental stance is really
Mm,
key. So what I mean by that is um, we really slow down as a listener, take a deep breath, and then listen and really listen to what the other person is saying without having any judgments or beliefs that we come into our own, without having our own ideas, and really responding to the other person's feelings. So, for example, let's say someone is talking to you about their struggles with a breakup. You could say, it is very sad that you're having this difficult time with someone that you really care about.
mm,
So I think really emphasizing on the emotion and making sure that you know your support your support is non-judgmental, I think is key.
yes, that's definitely a key thing because I remember also asking a question because I've definitely had, friends sharing everything with just everything that they've been going through. And I know a lot of times talking with other people as well, it's like you feel like you need to have the right response and like feel like you're going to mess up. But I think, like you mentioned, first is empathy, just feeling like no judgment at all and making them feel like it's a safe place for you to talk to. And then also just really listening because I feel like also for me it's like a lot of the times you're listening you're trying to come up with a response like how can I help, what should I tell them, but I've learned. And also I was reading, there was this, I think there was a psychologist, I forgot their name, but it was like a theory that was like just stick in the mud, like they don't want you to help them like give them a perfect solution, but just really sit with them in like the mud whatever they're going through and just listen and be there for them. So
Yes, exactly.
so
Yeah, and
mhm.
I think if it's a friendship, and it's also very common in friendship to give advice and give support, and I think it's okay. You don't have to restrict yourself to um feeling like you have to say the perfect thing. I think people understand when you're there and you're trying to help in any way that you can. And I think that's important.
Yes, I think that is really important. And then going back to just supporting people, what are some effective self care practices for the people who are supporting others with a mental health illnesses to prevent a burnout or and also maintain their own well being? Because that can also be a lot to handle.
Yeah. I would say that the coping strategies are similar to the coping strategies I talked about before, with like getting sleep, thinking about physical exercise or journaling or meditation or community support. Um, those are, making sure that you're taking good care of yourself and that you're doing okay in order to be able to help take care of another person. Um, the key thing, in addition to this, is really knowing our own limits.
Mm,
This is actually something I struggle with too, even being a
yeah,
mental health professional, is knowing when you could say, okay, you know what? Some days, we have a lot to give, we can give a lot, and then other days we just can't.
yeah,
And to be able to acknowledge our limits and to be okay with them, and to say to ourselves, I give you grace.
mm,
Um, and grace to be human as well, and grace to have our own struggles as well. So,
yes, definitely. That's really good. Just having grace for yourself because especially if I'm sure in like in your line of work you must have a lot of people that are going through. You have just only so much to give and I think that there is a key balance because at the end of the day, and as you mentioned, I've struggled with this too, is that we do have to prioritize our own personal well being and not in a selfish way, but if we do prioritize our personal well being, then we can best support others. That way, it just helps us as long as we're also good, then we can further support and really help others. But yeah, well, I would continue to discuss this topic forever. I know there's just so much about mental health and how we can help. Before we conclude, would you like to share any final thoughts, advice, or key take-home messages that you really want our listener to take away?
Yeah. I think the main take home message that I want to give is you are not alone, that we are never alone in our struggles, and to please reach out and get help, and that we are all deserving of help.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been amazing to just hear your insights, and again, an honor to have you here today. I'm excited for the opportunity to just connect with you again in the future and continue to see the impact that you're having in this line of mental health. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to be here and to talk with you. I really appreciate this conversation. It's so important.
Yes, thank you so much. Wow. So that was definitely a lot. And I know that sometimes this global issue of mental health can seem really overwhelming, but just know that there are professionals out there who are working towards it. And it's also up to us, but more importantly, that there is hope because God is there for us. And He addresses it, as we talked about in the series, in the Bible. And it's just always about talking to other people, praying to Him, and just reaching out and doing our own research. Because the moment we stop learning, whether that's through the Bible and Bible stories or doing our own research, is the moment we stop making a difference. So I highly encourage you to go and start learning, reading the Bible more. As always, we're here for you. And we're excited to start just a new series and just kind of see how this next season of our series goes. So until next time, we're here for you.